the author of The Wages of Appeasement. He is a Hoover Institution research senior fellow and a professor out at University of California, Fresno. And I always blank on this. My apologies. There, Professor Bruce Thornton with us. I didn't have it in front of me, Professor. We got off on a tangent. My apologies, sir. How are you?
No problem. Good. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. So I was going to have Bush play a Bush clip from Lauer defending the programs that we have, and President Obama's defending that, and I'll post those up on the Facebook page for everybody. I want to get to your article, The Lessons of Munich, because I think you identify something here that really, oftentimes we talk about Munich and the idea, well, it's the peace in our time and surrender of Czechoslovakia to the Nazis, and pretty much set the signal that you can't trust people like Hitler, and it's only worth the piece of paper, peace agreement that you have with people that don't believe and share your values or your vision is just about as much worth as the actual piece of paper. But you identify something else. You identify a culture within the countries of the leaders regarding Munich and specifically Neville Chamberlain's England and Germany's understanding of the culture and morale, specifically morale of the people. We look at the leaders and say, yeah, Chamberlain, he's responsible. But there was a society in place there. Could you explain?
Yeah, that's a great point, because just remember, and you can probably access a lot of this video online, when Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich, the third and final conference with Hitler, he was greeted like a hero. He was an international hero. From Pope Roosevelt, everybody thought that he had really prevented another world war. And that is because, as you said, the people, particularly in England, were so, apprehensive about another conflict. This is a period in the 30s when pacifist movements had their largest number of adherents, huge numbers, hundreds of thousands, in which, never again became sort of the motto because of just how, unprecedented the horrors of World War I were. You had a very powerful constituency for spending money on social welfare rather than on defense. So, yes, there was this huge desire on the part of the people for Chamberlain to succeed. And when it seemed that he succeeded, he was greeted like a hero. And it took till March of the next year when Hitler violated all the terms and simply rolled into Prague and took over the whole country that people began to realize, that this had been a bad deal. And then Chamberlain started to become the figure that we know. And, what your point is about morale. It's Napoleon who said morale is to the material of 3 to 1. In other words, it's 3 times more important than how many weapons you have and how large your military is. And this is a lesson we're seeing played out in the United States over the last, let's say, over the last 10 years. Because we have the largest, most powerful, unprecedented power of our military. And yet, right now, we are being pushed around and humiliated publicly and arrogantly by Iran over this latest fiasco of an agreement in which Iran will achieve its aims, and its aims is to possess nuclear weapons so that it becomes the regional hegemon in the Middle East, which means that our interests and that of our important ally, Israel, are going to be at risk. But there is a large constituency in this country for that sort of a settlement. For saying, make a deal and we can stop thinking about it and we go back to thinking about something else.
tell me, Professor, could a president have been elected in 2002, even 2004, I think we saw that, by saying, I'm just going to end wars. I'm going to end wars with that idea. Because I think that whole idea, that was forwarded and saying, I'm ending the war, I'm going to bring the troops home, I'm going to do that. I think that would have been, and I believe it, if we look at what Frank Luntz's analysis was on John Kerry, one of the things that came out was surrender and disloyal, not being loyal in that sense. The point is, it's offensive. It's offensive to me today, but America obviously has embraced it twice. Your thoughts?
Well, I think what's interesting about 2004 is despite the unpopularity of the war, that Bush got reelected. Now, does that mean it was only because the candidate he was running against was just unelectable, which he was, and a better candidate may have, were the people willing to give him another chance, with the surge, et cetera, later? We don't know. I don't think today you could get, let's say in 16, I don't think a candidate that comes and says, we're going to have to send another 100,000 troops back into Iraq to undo the damage that Barack Obama did. The mood of the country at this point, I don't think that person could get elected. And remember, Obama was elected in 08 in part because he said, we're going to end these wars. No, he didn't say, we're going to make sure we win these wars. He said, we're going to end these wars. And his failure to get the Status of Forces Agreement, which should have been a devastating blow to his administration and to the Democratic Party, it seemed to pass without barely a blip on the political radar. People just didn't care. So I think right now we're in a quasi-isolationist, withdrawn mood in this country. And we seem to go through these cycles, in our history. But, you have to anticipate long-term what the threats are going to be. And it's particularly, I think, depressing to think of how we went through this in the 90s, you remember, mainly because of euphoria of having won the Cold War and thinking, well, that's all settled. We're the superpower. We can take care of business. We can bomb the Serbians and make them behave. We can drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait pretty easily. And we ignored that threat of Al-Qaeda and those attacks until, of course, it exploded on us in 9/11. And we could be now back to the same sort of mindset, and which means, well, what's it going to take then? Is it going to take something else of that magnitude again to get people awakened to realize, you know what, we've got to look 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road in terms of threats that are materializing and possibilities and prepare for them.
What do you think of the fact that people will be filleted? I opened our segment tonight with a defense of the NSA and the programs because they saved lives and continue to save lives. I believe what President Obama is doing, because he's never really believed in that, in the sense of understanding our enemy and the urgency of it. But understand, the vast majority of people listening right now disagree. My audience disagrees with me on this issue, and that's okay. I get it. I remember what President Bush said in his final press conference. He said, do you remember what it was like here after 9/11? Do you remember everybody was pointing fingers, say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? And they had the Patriot Act and parts of it, and people made some statements back then regarding it and how it lined up. But bottom line, nobody was arguing after 9/11 to put these things in place because the threat was real. But if President Bush would have come in and not talked about, hey, I don't want to be a nation builder, remember, that's how he was elected, one of the reasons, and change that. Can a leader come in, recognize the threat, have an appreciation for the Constitution far more than the current president does, yet not be able to express that? Or is it politics being the art of what's possible? saying, hey, look, I'm going to be quiet when it comes to this issue. I'm not going to express it. Because I look at a leader, and I want a leader who is willing to go out there and say, yeah, we've got a problem. This is going to bite us, and it's going to bite us in a major way, and it's only going to get worse if we wait. Your thoughts?
Right. Well, when any communication involves a sender, a medium, and a receiver, and the most brilliant sender, in this case, speech maker, Ronald Reagan, right, with the best speech writers, the medium, you still have the recipient of the message. And if the recipient is not, sympathetic to that message, it's not going to make any difference. They have to be in a position to where they are now ready to listen. And it seems to me that over the past several years, we haven't had a big terrorist attack on our soil. We've had an economy that's been on everybody's mind. That's been the huge issue. We've gotten just sick and tired of the ingratitude on the part of the people that we've spent our fellow citizens' lives and our tax dollars on helping. And I think there's a mood. It's just like, you know what? Let them kill each other. Let them degenerate into, whatever dysfunctional nightmare their cultures are going to be. And I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that reaction. And it's an all-American, idea going back to the very beginning that, as Thomas Jefferson said, we don't have entangling alliances. John Quincy Adams said, we do not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. But we live in a world in which that's no longer a tenable strategy. Mm-hmm. And so it'd be very difficult for any leader to be able to make that case without some event or some set of circumstances to concentrate people's minds and to make them, think about it in a real way. And I just am afraid that what that event will be. And if you have an Iran with a nuclear bomb, then the calculus changes very significantly in terms of what's possible. So, we're a democracy. We're a representative democracy. We vote every 2 years. We vote people in, we vote people out. And at the end of the day, we're the ones that are responsible for whom we vote and why and what we decide is more important. And one last point very quickly.
Sure.
There's a bad habit that a lot of us have of thinking that we can have everything we want simultaneously without a trade-off. And this whole NSA issue involves a trade-off between security and privacy. And to have security, you're going to have some measure of privacy. And we have to remember that the dead don't have privacy. The dead don't have civil liberties. And so the first condition for enjoying all of our other civil liberties and rights is to be alive and not living in fear. So, there's a lot of us, I think, that just don't want to make that trade-off. They don't want to do the hard work of thinking, okay, we're going to have to give a little something up. And I don't know, letting the government have access not to the contents of what we are saying, but simply what the phone company and the internet company has, which is a record of, going back and forth. To my point of view, I don't see that as a huge trade-off. Now, I understand the argument because my younger son agrees with your audience, or the ones that think that that's wrong.
And I understand.
Yes, but they have the capacity. They have the capacity, and they might not be doing it now, but they could start doing it later. And this is how this insidious process. And I understand that argument. I take that point.
But extraordinary charges demand extraordinary evidence. We just had a report from our Congress that dealt with this and said, no, there haven't been any violations. And I guess that's what gets me. I think to myself, I am as suspicious as they come about government. But the way these things are presented is not accurate. You're having Glenn Greenwald and Julian Assange make the case for this? Really? And you're taking everything they say as the gospel? And you're not looking at Representative Rogers, I'm blanking on his first name, my apologies, from House Intel Chair, Mike Rogers, and he's saying, no, look, there's checks in places. And now a report has been released that obviously has confirmed that. And people are saying, well, they're going in and just looking. No, they're not. They have to have it. There's a check. Mark Thiessen was on the inside of this. John Yoo was on the inside of this.
Right.
And so that's what gets me, Professor. It's the fact that we have, because I think we have a President Obama where he has gone outside the lines of the Constitution. We have this kind of attitude, and that's going to, and as I said, when you have Assange and Greenwald making the case and accepted as gospel, and good folks like Rogers and others saying, no, that's not the case, it's really, you're going to get bad legislation that hurts America's security, in my estimation. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And the other point is that we went through all this over the Patriot Act. Again, a lot of people were made, you know what I mean? The same issue gone through. But people pointed out, look, we're just giving the government, the FBI, the same power police have to investigate organized crime. You know, but again, there has to be a trade-off. Of course there's going to be a trade-off. Of course there's risk in everything that we do. When you get in your car and get out on that freeway, you're at risk. And I don't know what it is. I think maybe it's emotional, or it's, as you pointed out, it's, you know, the agendas of the people who are providing the information. And people over-exaggerate the risk, and they see a nearer risk and do not see the larger, more serious risk.
Yes, absolutely.
And bottom line is, you know what? You have to sit down and you have to try and make that accommodation and realize that there's nothing that is 100% guaranteed.
Absolutely. Bruce Thornton, research fellow.
100% privacy.
Bruce Thornton, research fellow, Hoover Institution. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Professor. We're out of time. AFR Talk. Live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and always keep the faith in Jesus.